I'm going to ask you to visualize 3 scenarios. And the visualization part is very important. So please close your eyes and take a deep breath. Everyone? Okay. So imagine you're late to catch a flight, okay, to New York, and you rush to the airport, you make it to the security, you pass the boarding counter, you done with all your formalities, and just as you step inside the aircraft and the doors close behind you, the pilot steps out of the cockpit to just say, "Hi, how are you?" Okay, scenario number 1. Number 2, you get to your destination, you go to a local restaurant and you have the best meal of your life. Really, just visualize all the awesome mouth-watering dishes that you always wanted to have. So that's the meal that you're having. Really, really enjoy it, right? There are no calories in it. And at the table next to you at the same restaurant is a couple who are happily celebrating their anniversary. Okay. The next morning, you go to the biggest technology conference. That's why you were flying in there. And the CEO of this year's hottest startup just took the stage to speak. So now you should have a solid picture of all of those scenarios that I just shared with you. You can open your eyes because now I have some questions for you. So in your mental image, was the pilot a black man? Yes, no?
No.
No.
Okay. Was the married couple 2 men? Yes, no?
No.
No.
Did the tech CEO on stage look anything like me?
No.
No.
It's okay if 1, 2, or all your answers are no. And why did this happen? Your brain creates images of what's familiar. It's less of a fan of what is not familiar. So the things I mentioned are generally less familiar. So no matter how much you may like the idea of those, all those things, but when you are confronted with something which is not the familiar, the amygdala in our brains, we've had so many times we've heard about the amygdala, which is the most ancient part of the brain. It will signal the hypothalamus to fire up the pituitary axis, which is where the brain and the endocrine system intersect. And that's where what's going to happen. The adrenal glands are going to release cortisol into our bloodstream. It's going to trigger our stress response. So anything which is familiar will fetch a response, but anything which is not familiar will fetch a stress reaction. So Dr. Susan Fiske explains that when it comes to unfamiliar social settings and examples that I just shared with you, there is ample evidence that says that encountering fundamentally different situations from what we expect will elicitate a much stronger activation in the amygdala versus encountering something that we proceed or accept as the norm. So why are we discussing this? We're discussing this because today we're going to talk about unconscious bias. Let me now share the presentation. Okay, so what is bias? So let's define bias first. An inclination or prejudice for one or against one person or group, especially in a way that is considered to be unfair. So if that is bias, then what is unconscious bias? Unconscious bias are our attitudes or the stereotypes, the things that we've been exposed to, you remember the familiar stuff that affect our understanding, our actions and decisions in an unconscious manner. We don't even know that we are doing it, but it will have both favorable and unfavorable assessments. For example, I'm unconsciously gravitating towards people who are positive, who have cheery dispositions. So it's an unconscious bias because I'm doing it unconsciously. Nonetheless, there will be other situations where we unconsciously sift. We only look at what's familiar and we ignore the others. And by doing that, we are somewhere being unconsciously biased. So these are activated involuntarily without our awareness or even intentional control. So what can we do about it? Firstly, are we conscious of our unconscious bias? That's the first step. So have you ever, let's look at these situations. Have you ever ignored a colleague, assuming they or you might not even understand each other's language? Or you assumed that female colleagues are more suitable for administrative roles? Or when you think of filling in a position for receptionist, you will always go for a girl. You might have your logical reasons, but why a girl? We also see organizations where it's probably a security guy sitting out there. Or you selected a candidate for interview because they belong to your hometown, or they've gone to the same school or college or university, or come from the same faith. And sometimes you may even select the person because there's something about that person that reminds you of your younger self. So do any of these statements resonate with you? Did you answer yes to any one of them? If you did, then realize that you do unconscious bias. Let's look at some of the most common types of unconscious biases. So there's the affinity bias, like you feel a connection, and therefore jiske saath connection nahi hai, you're going to just sift them out. And then there's the perception bias, where of course we are falling prey to stereotypes and assumptions about different groups. Then there's the halo effect, where we project positive qualities onto people without actually knowing it. And then there's a totally opposite effect also called the horn effect, where where a person, when you see a person and he just or she just triggers what? Those negative aspects or qualities, and you just assume that, yeah, this person is going to be like this only. And of course, then there's a confirmation bias. When we're looking to confirm our own opinions, our pre-existing ideas. So the best part is that if you can recognize the bias and the pattern, you can certainly overcome it. But to do that, we need to have knowledge, we need to have ability. Of course, we also need to have the skills to break the habit and engage in deliberate practice. So there's a tool called pause, where you can use it to first pause and check with yourself. Check yourself. Am I making an assumption? Am I making any judgment based on my own personal biases? So really check. And then check others. Am I open to listening to what others have to say, what they are feeling, what they're thinking, what they're expecting? Or are they also making assumptions? And if they are, then is there an opportunity for me to coach them? If at all I know how to coach them. And then double check. Am I really role modeling those behaviors? And let's call them behaviors, because culturally inclusive behaviors is a little more a technical term, but we'll get into it, for providing input and direction to everyone so that everybody works together in the same direction. So finally, being aware of your biases, looking at strategies to mitigate bias. Here are some most common ones that you can look at. Start by self-awareness. So when we understand our own styles, we understand what triggers us, and then being conscious, being mindful, maintaining a development-focused mindset, asking open questions, having regular coaching conversations with your peers and also with your teams. Listening at multiple levels. We hear, we listen, we deep listen, we active listen. So there are listening happening at various levels. And that's how you recognize. You're listening to yourself also and to others also. And lastly, actively identifying diversity gaps, because that's where you can approach your decision making and your delegation through the lens of fostering inclusion. So whenever we talk of unconscious bias, we always talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion. So what is inclusion here? Inclusion is about including everyone as we go. Now, here are a few things which you can do to include people. And in that way, you are helping sift out or rather remove any unconscious bias that you may be possessing. So like giving consistent feedback that builds on your strength and course corrects, being fair, respectful, creating trust, maybe some of the values that you hold as an organization or as a business. Support when others are in distress. Listen, not cut off people. Gestures of inclusion, of caring, even a simple nod, smile, or eye contact is great. It's really great. So the key actions: respect, seek out and embrace individual differences. So don't go for the familiar alone. Familiar means comfort zone. When we respect and seek out, we are basically embracing other differences as well. And that's where diversity comes in. Be aware of your own bias and how it can impact you as an individual, as a team leader, or a organization head. Be intentional about using inclusive language, the speech, the words, the body gestures. Is it inclusive? And eliminating micro inequalities by micro affirmations that we just saw. Utilize coaching and feedback to build a sense of belonging and individual growth, and thus create your own strategy to drive your organization's vision of building a culture of belonging within teams. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you today.
Thank you, Saloni.